So look, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm going to start with just taking this opportunity, if I can get my PowerPoint slide to advance.
Yep, got it.
That's full screen.
Yes.
There we go. Thank you. What I wanted to do before we get started, so welcome everybody, was just take a moment to just ensure that everybody's aware of some of the free CPLD resources that I guess have been building in behind the scenes in the background. And these are obviously available to you and your colleagues. And really at the heart of that, Barry and I, Professor Barry Carpenter, who's on the call and joined us today, have been working on something called the Learning Shared podcast. And for those who don't know, the purpose of the podcast really is to tap into some of the really wonderful practice and work that's going on within the EfL community. As things stand right now, there are well over 500 specialist schools and settings now within the EfL community. So there's this rich treasure trove of inspiring practice and wonderful things happening. And so we see the podcast as really being, I suppose, two things. One is a platform for those practitioners. We want to really give and amplify the voice of those people that are doing great things and give them a chance to share that with the community at large. But the second piece is obviously then to pull some of this wonderful work together and some of these great ideas and then share them with the community at large so that everybody can benefit from them. And by the end of this school term, we'll have 24 episodes that will be available. So you can see them all there. The first 15 cover various conversations that we had around the notion of recovery and reconnection, which none of us could have predicted is potentially as relevant, if not more relevant now than ever before. And then we've got a whole bunch of other episodes that look at engagement. We've had a fabulous episode on family-centered practice, which I heartily recommend you take a look at. We're in the process of recording the second part of a two-part series that looks at active recovery and the concept of sport and sensory sanctuaries, and that will be available towards the middle end of next week. And then our finale is next Tuesday, which hopefully you've all have received an email about. If not, just check with the cloud administrators at your school, because they certainly would have had the email. We're planning a conference next Tuesday, the 29th of June, between 10 and 12 p.m, which is on the topic of mental well-being. As you can see from the lineup there, we've been very fortunate. We've been able to pull together a brilliant lineup of speakers, real national leaders on the topic. Professor Carpenter is going to be providing the opening keynote to set the scene for quite an in-depth discussion and set of presentations around the topic of mental well-being. We've got Dr. Tina Ray, who some of you may know is an award-winning author and education psychologist. Sharon Gray, OBE, has run 2 to 3 outstanding SCMH schools and is going to be talking about Thrive and the Thrive approach. We've got Laura Purser, who heads up the early years and primary department at the University of Buckingham, but is also responsible for authoring the master's programs, the NASENCO programs. And then, as you can see, we've got a whole bunch of school practitioners, school leaders from a range of different settings, schools, colleges, who are going to be sharing their approaches towards mental well-being. And in particular, in their sections, they're going to be looking at how they use evidence for learning to support some of those approaches. And then Tom Thatcher, who you can see on the list there, Tom's at St Hugh's School in North Lincs. They were one of the Department for Education's pilot schools on the RHSE pilot. And so Tom's going to be sharing some of his findings and reflections from that. So hopefully that'll be a fantastic day. And that's going to be our finale, if you like, for the year in terms of the EfL events. I've put the link there actually just quickly. The link is there if you want to make a note of it. It's on the Evidence for Learning website, but if you go to evidenceforlearning.net/learning shared and then mental-well-being-conference-June-June-21, there's more information about the event and a sign up form. It's free to join. and participate. So that's next Tuesday. So on to today's session formally. I'm delighted to welcome the co-hosts for this session. We've got Professor Barry Carpenter, CBE, who is going to be providing us with an opening keynote. But Barry needs little introduction, but he's been almost a father figure in the space of SEND over the last 40 years. He's been a head teacher, head teacher. He's had a illustrious career in academia, as well as obviously advising government around the complex needs study, and was instrumental in the development of research around engagement as a pedagogy. Barry's going to be kicking us off with an opening keynote. And then we've got three practitioners. We've got Luke Simmons from Greenside School, Sarah Riley from the West Silk Farnley Partnership up in the Northeast, or Yorkshire Way, and then Nathan. Nathan's based at Co-op Academy in Southfield, but is actually going to be speaking to us as a doctoral student. Nathan will explain more when he speaks, but we're really excited to bring that dimension to this discussion as well. Our agenda is really straightforward. We've got, we'll have Barry's introductory keynote in a second. We'll then have three short lightning talks. And then what we want to do is to get you into breakout rooms. So the lightning talks are going to be fairly short, sort of 10, 15 minutes max. And then we'll get into breakout rooms. We want to give you a chance to chat to other colleagues. We've put together some questions, which I'll bring up at that point, that we hope to use to scaffold some conversations, but you're very, very welcome to use this time to ask your own questions and go on your own information gathering hunts. So with that, I'll hand things over to Barry and welcome Barry to the stage. Thank you very much, Barry.
Okay. Welcome to all of you. It's just fantastic that we've got a group focused on PMLD. And for me, this is a moment of pure self-indulgence, because PMLD, children with PMLD, learners with PMLD, shaped the very early part of my career, and the joy of that teaching experience has lived with me throughout the rest of my career, whatever positions I've been fortunate enough to hold. And I just thought, as you launch forward into your discussions today, it's just worth reflecting on that changing pattern of profound and multiple learning difficulties, how it has evolved over the years, because believe it or not, the PMLD children you work with now were not, if I go back to, and you have to remember I am very old, if I go back to my second teaching post in 1980, when I was made head of department for children with PMLD, the children I had in that group then were very different to the children you would find yourselves working with now. In fact, those children and young people, well, let's put it historically, there had been the transfer of power from health to the education authority back in 1971 to 73. I was not teaching then, but I was one of the first teachers out from the education system back in the back end of the 70s who had actually been through an education-based teacher training. And the first children to flood the system, education system as it were those with severe learning difficulties. And for a good while, nobody was thinking about those with profound and multiple learning difficulties, who actually tended to not be in the what had been junior training centres. They tended to, in the main, be in the hospital schools attached to, and some of the terminology you have to remember is historical, but is quite confrontational in today's language. We're still in what we call the subnormality hospitals. And certainly that was the position I found myself in 1980, children being brought into the community school that I was working in from what had been those hospital situations. Many schools called them special care units. I think the school I worked in actually had what we call planned dependency unit, a PDU. So for these children, they had not even had education under the health system, really. They had been very much contained on their wards, and it had been a very care-dominated experience for them. So these were days of great innovation in terms of curriculum, obviously using lots of very early developmental stuff as starting points in those days. And then in 1979 we had studies coming through, two very significant, if you like, academic pieces of work, because again there was little or no academic work around educating these children. And when I said they were quite different to the children you would have had, the children I'm thinking of would have often had microcephaly that had not been intervened upon. And so you had children, again, forgive the bluntness of my language, whose heads were as large as television screens, where you had to make sure that the cushioning and positioning of their heads was very carefully put together, otherwise their heads would fall forward and their necks would break. And you had children with very, very sort of rare medical conditions that had never had any intervention, and lots of children with what we called windswept bodies, where I remember Kathleen joining the class where she had really loving elderly parents, and she had just been literally kept on a bed and never moved. Physiotherapy wasn't available to her. Paula joined the group actually from her home, not from a hospital, but she had largely been kept in the bath because it was the only bath, that had now been put onto wheels, because it was the only shaped vessel that they could find that could support this hugely twisted and deformed body. But Paula would shout tea time at 3 o'clock every day, because that was what she'd been used to hearing from her days when she had lived on the ward. So when we had the Jean Ware, and some of you will know Jean Ware from her work on Quest and similar, when we had the Jean Ware report, it was really very significant. She called her book Special Care, and this was really the start of the movement from that special care thinking to the teaching and learning and curriculum frameworks, which were really a very novel concept around this group at that time. And so you had this evolving pedagogy coming through, and two very significant influences then would have been the work of Carol Hoovery, and I'm actually holding her book here. I've still got it on my bookshelf because it's so beautifully written. There are still messages in there that are just great about washing and feeding and eating and drinking. It's still as relevant today. I had a look at it yesterday. So you had Carol's book, which gave us a really good theoretical framework with lots of practical illustrations on educating children with profound handicaps, as again it says. And then, of course, that seminal piece, 1988, Flo Longhorn's book on a very special curriculum, a sensory curriculum, which, of course, has spiraled and spiraled as the years have gone by. And I remember back in 1988, I was in my first headship then, and my school had been part of a national survey that HMI had conducted. We had very good, very proactive HMI in those days, and their work had looked at the education of children with PMLD. And at that point, HMI actually led a national conference and subsequent national training around the education of children with PMLD, and I went as HMI for the next 3 years to help lead on that work. And it was, I remember the conference we had back in 1987, where people were so excited to come together. There just hadn't been a conference for PMLD educators before. Can you believe that? And the overwhelming excitement, the conference was held at Westhill College, which is now part of University of Birmingham. And people were so excited to be together that they wanted to keep in touch. And remember, we didn't have the advantages of modern technology. We'd have had a Facebook group at the drop of a hat. So in fact, I agreed to take on something called PMLD Link, which hopefully most of you know. And in those days, we used to get very roughly written articles for PMLD Link. I'm holding a copy here of its current format. And we used to produce it on the school photocopying machine with whatever spare colour paper we'd got for that quarter of the year. It used to come out every 3 months, and my post-16 students used to help compile it and staple it and post it out. PMLD Link has grown and grown and grown. It's now under the editorship of Dr. Rob Ashdown. He does a terrific job with it, and it's a really true evidence-based, practice-focused journal. If you don't know PMLD Link, please can I suggest you sign up to that organisation, and in fact get the hard copy. It worries me that everything is going online. Frankly, you don't know what you don't know. There's still a place for picking up that magazine from the coffee table in the staff room and reading something that you didn't know, or oh, I'd like to explore that, and going then to the website. But this is a really invaluable piece, and whether you're a researcher in the field or whether you're somebody starting off, it would really shape, inform and develop your key concepts. And then of course we had the work of my much loved and late colleague Dr. Penny Lacey, where she went forward and built on the SLD training courses that we had at Birmingham into a postgraduate course for PMLD. But I want to reflect in current days, what are the major causes of PMLD in this 21st century? And it's actually prematurity of birth. That's the major factor that's rewritten the special needs registers of any school in the land. But in PMLD terms, it is the group of children that really has transformed what we know about PMLD and who the children are coming into the PMLD sector. So for many, life actually begins like this. And it's been the particular change has come, prematurity is anything 36 weeks gestation and before. But for those children born pre-28 weeks, that's where the real change has come about, because the brain then is white matter, it is not grey matter. And so many of the things you need for higher cognitive functioning do not develop until post 28 weeks. So here you have children at very, very early developmental levels. And of course, every year that passes, another child who is younger and younger and younger in the gestational phase survives. So the Lancet, the medical journal, just before last Christmas reported a 47% increase in children surviving between 22 and 24 weeks gestation. What's the brain of a 23-weeker look like? I'm not quite sure, and I'm not sure that I've ever taught one in whatever role I've undertaken in my career. But those children can appear in your classroom and basically be saying, here I am, educate me. And what are our curriculum starting points there for those children who may be at very, very different developmental phases again, but whose learning pathways, because of the reconfiguration of the brain, because it was expelled into this world so very early, may be different again. Or for some, life may begin like this, very prematurely born twins. I just think that is just so wonderful to see the bonding even then, and that whole thing about touch is very relevant at whatever developmental phase, as is early music. Some fabulous research from Austria on music that can be used in certain pitch ranges, and a wonderful Spanish study that has shown that through kangarooing babies skin on skin, even with their fathers, you can get communicative sound that can be replicated, and it's made us rethink the whole paradigm of human communication. But also, let's not forget our families and the premature arrival of parenthood. That for many, parenthood was not meant to begin at 24 weeks in the gestational phase. It was not meant to be huddled around an incubator, worried out of your wits about will your baby survive, and then if your baby survives, how will they survive? And the work of Dr. Patricia Champion in this area is absolutely seminal, and is still some of the best work around to inform how we work with parents when their child is prematurely born and therefore may have profound and multiple learning disabilities. And at long last, the DFE, in some of its recent work, particularly from my time as National Director at the DFE, began to recognise, as the end sentence says here, the improved survival rate of low birth weight babies, and extremely, so that we talk about low birth weight, we talk about extremely low birth weight babies, those born before 26 weeks, it's saying here, but that's based on an American piece of research. You know, those children, the modern medical progress has transformed those children who may have profound and multiple learning disabilities and may now be in your classrooms. I like this model that is taken again from some of the New Zealand research. The best research on prematurely born children in the world is actually in New Zealand. And you see there that the four phases of development of the brain, you can apply those to pedagogical language as well. And it's only in that final phase of brain development, which therefore is happening post 32 weeks gestation, that you really get that higher level executive functioning. Before that, you get these earlier phases. So really, a child born at 24 weeks gestation has got brainstem and midbrain, and is beginning to emerge into limbic, but it's not there. So that might sometimes give us insights as to why certain responses are happening. Certainly that sort of, when a loud noise goes off and some of your PMLD children startle, and there's that shivering in their body and the hand flapping and shaking, that's because they still cannot regulate the auditory sounds, because the brain has not reached an advanced level of development to cope with processing that sort of auditory information. But this phrase from a mother of a prematurely born child, I think for us as teachers, speaks powerfully. Wired differently. And she was telling me about her prematurely born son, and that his brain, she felt, was wired differently. A doesn't go to B, B doesn't go to C, C doesn't go to D. A goes to X, B goes to Y, and C goes to Z. The thing is that you have to, with your talents and your skills and your intuition and your insights as a teacher of children with PMLD, is to find more and more about how that brain is wired. Because when we know how that child learns differently, then we know how we can teach differently. There are three challenges, I think, in learning that have lived with me throughout that time, whatever type of PMLD child I have been engaged with. And those challenges to learning are around their self-regulation, their keeping calm, their management of the arousal states, because if they're not calm and if their arousal is not lowered, then they will not be able to engage us in learning. As we know from forthcoming regulation from this September, the engagement model will kick in, that the work of the Rochford Review is built on that earlier work I did as National Director at the DFE, where we looked at children with complex needs, including those with PMLD, and discovered that engagement was the best predictor for successful learning. And so you've got all that work on the engagement profile, which I think is an absolutely crucial tool in PMLD. If you want the engagement scale, but summative assessment reporting will be coming in the form of the five areas of engagement in the engagement model from Rochford. If you haven't already listened to the podcast in the series that Alan was mentioning, can I recommend to you the podcast that I've recorded with my colleague Bev Cobill on everything you need to know about engagement. It is not just about what's going to happen from this September. It's about that whole journey of engagement, why this is an approach that is deeply meaningful for all children with significant learning difficulties and disabilities. That working memory, that holding of task information is a significant challenge in their learning. And two guiding principles from my early career were that, in terms of curriculum development, were that of what's the critical function of what we need children to learn, and to also respect the fact that true full independence for some of our children with PMLD is just not a reality. Forever their lives are going to be one of interdependency. So maybe some of our teaching styles need to be modelled around that, and therefore that notion of partial participation for them may be the most successful outcome. But certainly those models of interdependency and those whole pedagogical principles of the co-creation, the co-construction, the co-production of learning for and with the child. Some of those beautiful sensory exchanges, almost sensory conversations you can have with a child. And then that mental flexibility, adapting to change during the day, is also a big challenge for the child born prematurely. So just a few thoughts there to start off our conversations today. I'm going back now to Alan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks for that introduction. So our next speaker is going to be Luke.
You should now be able to see that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Blake. Well, good afternoon. My name is Luke Simons. I'm one of the assistant heads at Greenside School. And I was quite taken with Barry's introduction for two reasons. It kind of feeds into what I'm going to talk about. Firstly, I don't know what I don't know. It's a constant adventure working in special education. I feel ill-equipped on many days and embrace that lack of being equipped. And then the second point Barry made, which will feed directly into this really, is the notion of what he called sensory conversations. And so this presentation really is trying to address the notion of conversation and voice for learners with PMLD. And I want to talk a little bit about how Greenside's been moving forward with that, grappling with that, discussing that. Next slide, please. So who are we? Well, Greenside School is classed a school for severe learning difficulties based in Stevenage in Hertfordshire in England. We currently have around 160 students on roll, learners on roll, and they are aged between 3 and 19. Our cohort, as with a lot of schools, it feels as though it's changing all the time. As Barry's mentioned, the level of cognitive and health issues are becoming more and more complex, and is forcing us to consider other ways of approaching our teaching. Next slide, please. This is just an example of some of our learners. In fact, some of these photos are taken from the Evidence for Learning app. They are a wonderful group of individuals, and I learn a great deal from working with them. I've been at Greenside School about 11 years. I've worked both in primary phase of the school, the secondary phase, and now I'm currently in the post-16 phase. And we are, which perhaps is a significant transition, is that a lot of these learners I've seen go through school and are now at a point where they are considering what happens after being at school. This community that's been with some of them since the age of 3 will now cease to exist, and they will go on to do something else, perhaps college, perhaps supported living, a number of different options open to them. And for some, perhaps nothing. And the fear around that, really, as a professional, but also for the families we support. Next slide, please. Our approach at Greenside, as a lot of schools, I'm sure, is to put the learner at the centre. And this is one of my colleagues calls the wheelie good curriculum, which is our not a cheesy gag, but the notion that the individual is at the centre. The educational healthcare plan is providing us with the information we need to develop our curriculum and our assessment and our approach at school based on who they are. So we try to be incredibly bespoke in approaching what every individual needs, and that can be incredibly hard in a setting, as I'm sure you can imagine. Next slide, please. Our evidence, the use of our app is quite well embedded in who we are at school, and we have a number of different assessment tools that we use depending on the needs of the individual. So these are some examples of what we're using, Routes for Learning, for most of our PMLD learners, the Autism Education Trust certs, which is social communication, emotional regulation and transactional support model, which is another autism model. Pivots, some of our learners are on the national curriculum, early years obviously, and RAPA for our post-16 learners. And we are slowly getting to grips with the engagement model and what that might mean to our forms of assessment. Next slide, please. So that's who we are. I just want to talk a bit about where we are, because that really is what I've come to talk to you about. So next slide, please. I am a teacher. I'm also a qualified drama therapist, and I qualified as a drama therapist about 5 years ago. Greenside has always taken pride in having quite a therapeutic underpinning in our work, in how we work with our learners. Very relational, very communicative. These are a number of the things that we're using to support that. So we have an awful lot of support from education theatre companies such as Bamboozle. We use Hertfordshire Steps, which helps us in supporting our learners in their regulation. Intensive interaction is incredibly valuable in building those sensory conversations, and obviously the work of Joanna Grace. And next slide, please. And all of this led me to a question more than 5 years ago about, well, hang on, what am I? Am I a teacher or am I a therapist? Because what I'm doing is I'm working with these individuals on some very tricky sensory conversations about who they are, and really trying to listen to what they need and what they don't need. And that forced a gear shift in my approach to my career. And that's why I retrained as a drama therapist at that point, because I felt psychotherapy was incredibly important part of my toolkit. Next slide, please. One seminal book, which is quite old now, but this was I read this before I trained as a drama therapist, was Developmental Drama. I love drama. I consider myself a drama teacher, but I felt drama was becoming the enabler for a lot of the education, the learning that I was doing. And I felt I needed more. There was always more to learn. I didn't know what I didn't know. So equipping myself with psychotherapy to enable the kind of support I was offering in school seemed a no-brainer to me in a lot of ways. Next slide, please. So the power for me of drama therapy is the notion that it's not talking therapy. And if we're talking about learners with PMLD, a lot of these learners cannot talk in the traditional sense, and we need to be able to hear in the non-traditional sense, which is why the use of drama therapy, certain performative aspects seemed incredibly important to me in order to create relationships with the individuals that I was educating. Next slide, please. In drama therapy, we talk about the indirect approach, the use of using other things in order to interrogate what is going on for that individual. So the use of story or music or drama or play to help an individual access what's going on in their own world, in their own life. Next slide, please. And as we can all identify with, that felt incredibly important right now and over the last 18 months or so with COVID. Relationships that were currently okay at school and were developing were lost, and a lot of ground needed to be covered. And ground needed to be covered not just with the learners themselves, but with the family groups. So this recovery curriculum became incredibly important, almost the spine of our education at Greenside School. Irrespective of COVID, Building relationships with these individuals with PMLD was incredibly important. Community became incredibly important, and what I'll come on to mention in the next slides is the notion of what happened to our post-16 community as a result of COVID, but also as a result of planning, which it was pure fluke the way it worked. Our curriculum continues to be incredibly transparent. We need to explain very clearly to our families and our carers why we are doing the things we are doing with the learners we're doing. We also need to be incredibly transparent for the individuals themselves. Metacognition, it's vitally important that we are as explicit as we can be with our individuals. Drama therapy became incredibly important in that dialogue I'm having with myself still. But I'll mention it as we go on. I don't want to rush ahead. And likewise with space. So if we could go on to the next slide, I'll give a bit of depth to this. So something that's happened this academic year for Greenside, which I wanted to sort of celebrate with you, is the development of our post-16 resource, which we are calling To Learn. It is right slap bang in a local shopping centre, and we've basically taken over about 3 buildings within that shopping centre, and it has become the hub of our post-16 area. And as you can see from the photographs, we have learners with a mix of capability. The other addition to the complexity, to the wonder of this To Learn setting, is that it's in partnership with a local college. So what we're offering is an opportunity, a transition point from leaving sixth form, leaving school, going into a college setting. Because it's in a non-school, traditional school building in that sense, there's a lot more space and there's a lot more opportunity to do things in a slightly different way. And that seems to have enabled our learners in an incredible way. So space, as part of the recovery for growth, space is incredibly important in allowing some real sensory conversations between peers and between adults with the learners with PMLD. It's been incredibly enabling in that regard. Next slide, please. This is just it's probably very small, and I don't want to dwell on it for too long, but this is just an example of our To Learn curriculum pathway. It starts from the bottom and works upwards, and it still ties, although in line with the college's needs and our own needs, it also ties in very clearly to the importance of those 4 aspects of learning, which we've deemed incredibly important at Greenside. The notion of my creativity, my community, my well-being, my communication, my thinking, my well-being, and my body. The 4 aspects that we think are incredibly important going through all of education. Next slide, please. I'm almost finished, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about this ongoing sensory conversation between ourselves and learners. I'm currently writing a chapter called for a drama therapy text called May We Speak For You. And it's really around the importance of hearing the voice of our learners with PMLD. And I've taken the metaphor of a text by Doreen Cronin called Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type. And forgive my irreverence, but I will talk about this text. In the story, there is a farm with a farmer, and the farmer is unable to understand the needs of the animals on his farm because he doesn't speak the language of cow or duck or pig or whatever animal. And the cows take it upon themselves to have agency and support the other animals on the farm because they have a certain skill set, i.e. they can type. They've found a typewriter in the barn and they're going to use it. So they are going to advocate for all the other animals on the farm because they have a certain skill set. And they decide, without really researching, what they think the other animals want. and they get it wrong sometimes. And that metaphor really struck me when I was thinking about the notions of a multi-agency approach to a learner with PMLD. You have an individual who is surrounded by professionals who perhaps, although at the heart of what they're doing is that individual, but they all have different aspects that are important to them. And so they speak for an individual with PMLD, as I do. But are they really listening? And the notion of being able to really listen to what our PMLD learners need is a hard one when they don't have a traditional voice per se. So the notion of using tools to really be present with a learner with PMLD, to really listen to their needs, is incredibly important. And that's where the element of drama therapy has really come into play. I've got two student drama therapists working with me currently, and they were really keen and very nervous to be working with clients with profound and multiple learning difficulties, because traditional therapy seemed very far away from how on earth are these learners going to access this? But they've actually built some amazing relationships and created some incredible opportunities for these individuals. Next slide, please. My last slide, really, just to celebrate some of the opportunities that we've seen and been able to document. These photos are taken directly from the Evidence for Learning app. Is one lad called Jordan, who previously has been in quite a small, but that's the necessity of the classroom space, quite a small classroom space. And he's quite a big lad, wheelchair-based lad, with no pre-verbal. So an opportunity to engage with his peers and adults, and giving him the time to do that and the space to do that has been incredibly, profoundly impactful at the new setting, in the new to learn setting. So he's had an opportunity to explore the space without the shackles of his wheelchair, to just move around the space, access elements of the learning that perhaps he couldn't access before because he just wasn't present for it, or he had his own bespoke timetable. But now he's making choices about which aspects of the learning he takes part in, who he gets involved with, who he doesn't get involved with. And it's been an incredible win. This is an incredible example of a real positive outcome of the way we are working, or the way we're continuing to work. Next slide, please. That's a real, I've slammed through Greenside's adventure at the moment, and we're again, as Barry said, I don't know what I don't know. We're still learning. We're still learning as we go. But we've really capitalised on what COVID thrown at us in the last 2 years, 18 months, and the Evidence for Learning app has been incredibly helpful in bringing all that information together, to be a voice for these individuals. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you very much, Luke. That was, I'm sure everyone will agree, that was really good to see. I mean, it's good to hear that, like you said, the adventure, but to hear the references and to see some of the examples. Thanks very much for sharing. And part of what we're also going to do, if anybody wants to pick up with any of the speakers afterwards, after the event, if you want to get in touch with me, I'll happily put you in touch with Luke, Nathan, or Sarah. We're going to bring Sarah up next. Blake's going to share the screen for this one. So Blake, I'll let you share while I just quickly introduce Sarah. Sarah's PMLD lead at West Silk, the Farnley Partnership Schools, which is a group of schools up in Yorkshire. Sarah, do you want to unmute, and we can just check that your mic's working okay as well?
Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Good to go. Wonderful. Thanks. Well, look, I'll hand the floor over to you, Sarah. Thanks very much.
Right. So this literally is just a whistle-stop tour around the recording and assessment journey we've been on at the West Sill. So we began using personalised learning plans for our students with complex needs in 2007, and that came out of some collaborative working we did with colleagues across the other special schools in Leeds, where we developed this policy and guidance for teaching and learning for students with complex and multiple learning needs, recognising that even within a special school system they needed a separate approach. Why we used the term complex and multiple learning needs was because at the time a lot of the people that we were working with in the other schools had leadership teams that would only consider the students to be PMLD if they were in wheelchairs. And as we all know, we have a lot of students who have profound learning disabilities, but who are also ambulant. So we sort of changed the terminology at the time in order to try and get more people on board for that. So in terms of our assessment around the personalised learning planning, we were originally using the Roots for Learning assessment material, but eventually found that we needed to find something to fill the gap between those students who were coming to the top end of Roots for Learning and for those who were never going to reach P4. And at that time, then we found the work of Willow Dean and their learning journeys work they've done. And over time, we've adapted and built on the work that they did to create a bespoke suite of assessments that go across the whole range, not just for our PMLD students, but across the whole range of students at the West Silk. And it was while we were looking for a platform to begin to record progress that we began our collaboration work with Evidence for Learning. So now all of our assessments are uploaded as frameworks, and the screenshot is just some examples of those assessments that we've got. So if we can move on to the next slide. And then in addition to the using Evidence for Learning for our assessments, we've also in the last 12 months began to use it as a way of collecting evidence of progress against our education and healthcare plans. And so that this allows us to monitor the progress towards outcomes using the next small steps in the students' personalised learning plans with evidence that can be updated termly. And so these next slides are just, these screenshots are just of what that looks like. So we have all of the students' aspirations within the PLG. And then if we can have the next slide. We see then we have the outcomes and we're able to measure the progress and from the baselining. And for that, we're using the work done by the Dale School, so the MAP Continuum of Skills Development. For that, we've condensed it a little, so we've only got four points of assessment, but we found that really useful. So can I just have the next slide? So we just see the way that looks. We're covering all of the students' EHCP goals within the plan. And the next slide. And then we haven't quite got to the final way of why we'll use this eventually, but we're hoping then that a learning journey can be produced for the annual review, and that will reduce the amount of paperwork for the teachers. You know, because what we find about Evidence for Learning is it's become a really great tool to condense the work, or to stop it all being duplicated, so that we can just get on and focus on the teaching and learning for the students rather than on the sort of paperwork. And if we have the next slide, and we have been able to use it this year to be able to show progress on our COVID recovery baselines, and so we can see there what I mean about it being part of the continuum of the skill development. So we've got the prompting, the fluency, the maintenance, and the generalisation. And as I said, we look termly and we see what progress has been made against that. So if we can have the next slide. So that just illustrates that a little bit more sort of clearly. So from Billy's COVID baseline in 2020 to what it looked like then in March 2021 against some of his targets. Okay, and next slide. And then the next steps, of course, is obviously to use for evidence against the engagement model. These screenshots I know still show the 7 steps from the original engagement profile in work, but it is going to be altered so that we have the new 5 areas of engagement on there. And then we're part of our development for next year is to look at how we can map that together with our existing assessments and our educational healthcare plan collecting of evidence, so that we've got the whole of the system in one place. And that's it. Very whistle top.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. That's great. Thanks. And it's really good to hear how everybody's kind of working in their own ways with schools. And one of the things that we hope that this group can do is provide basically a platform, if you like, a forum where you can network and share ideas. Obviously, the common theme that everybody said, especially when working with learners with PMLD, is this great sense of unknown. Every day is a new day. Working with the children, there are so many. It's like an active piece of research every single day. And if we can do whatever we can do as evidence for learning to help connect you all as practitioners, we're really open to doing that, whether it's through meetings like this, which are great, but obviously we can't be doing these every day, or whether it's through this new set of tools that we're hoping to build over the summer, which are basic social networking tools. What we hope they'll be able to do is that they'll be able to connect you directly in a very secure way with other colleagues and other practitioners in other schools. And we can set up virtual groups where you can post questions. So kind of like some of these groups that exist on Facebook at the moment, but not on Facebook. So they're completely secure, somewhere where you can feel very safe and trusted and about having conversations. But thank you very much to Sarah and Luke for sharing with us what they're doing in their schools. The next speaker is a slightly different thing, slightly different approach. Nathan reached out to me. I guess I've known Nathan probably three years or so now, Nathan, I guess, isn't it? Nathan first started working with Evidence for Learning at one school, then he moved to another school, and luckily they were using EfL as well, so he's there. But he's actually reached out wearing a very personal hat. He's doing a doctorate at the moment, and I'll let Nathan go through the details of that. But he asked if he could share some of the work that he's doing and also put a call out to see if anybody's interested in working with him. And if any others of you are doing either doctoral projects, postgrads, any kind of research, and you're interested in tapping into the community, we've got, as you can see, just by looking around the room here, there is so much expertise and experience and, you know, in our network. If we can help to connect you, then please just let me know. I'm really happy to make those connections. But Nathan, over to you. Blake's going to drive this one again. So hopefully we can get that to work.
Thank you. So I didn't actually know what everybody else was talking about, but actually it was like it was a build up to what I'm talking about right now, right from what Barry was talking about, and particularly when he talked about the limbic system and the relation to emotion, and then the way in which we work that Luke talks about in terms of that therapeutic process, and ultimately what Sarah was talking about in terms of assessment. So all those factors are very much part of my the building blocks of what my doctorate is, on top of which it came from my master's dissertation, whereby I looked at New Zealand's narrative assessment format for children with PMLD in my setting at the time, and it focused on one student. And what came out of the discussion and the conclusion of my dissertation was that we ignored the body. So we were very brain centered. We're very focused on brain development, what the brain does, that learning is in the brain. And actually, if you look beyond science, then you find other ways to consider what learning is. It's not to say that science isn't, that's perfectly reasonable, but what my interest in calling it critical analysis is to look at particularly for other philosophical aspects, so particularly feminist theory, what's called post-structural theory, but also other theories. So, but the basis of my theory is what's called phenomenological. And I'm sure people out there have read Ben Simmons' work, and that was part of the inspiration for the direction of travel that I took, although it's slightly different than Ben's work, but it certainly builds on everything that everybody said today. So that was really helpful. So thank you to everybody for that. We can have the next slide. So as I said, it's involved in a critical analysis of current and what's upcoming in terms of the engagement model legislation for assessment for PMLD. And the things that people have already talked about, things that Barry talked about in terms of views of independence, and similarly that Luke talked about in the same way, this idea that we're driven by the idea that students will be independent and go to work, when we know that is not necessarily the case, or it's certainly not the case in a traditional sense. So therefore, you know, we need to be critical about what that actually means, and therefore some of the conclusions of my thesis may well be around policy, you know, changes, might be some things that come out of it. Central to what I'm looking at is the process of learning. So that's the phenomenon, that's the main thing that I'm looking at. And from the perspective that I'm looking at it, it doesn't belong to it isn't centered in the brain. That isn't my perspective on it. So it's looking at it in different ways. And I know Barry's just posted about Sherborne, and I actually looked at Sherborne's work and Laban's work as well. So it's really interesting around what Laban says about the body and about particularly about emotion and expression. But I won't go into that now. That's a whole other conversation. So central to it is this process of learning, and it seeks to understanding which it takes shape for a child with PMLD, because as I said, we build very much on, and it's perfectly understandable, it's built upon on science and scientific study. And my personal interest in this is about lived experience, and where that came from was around when I've been working with children with PMLD for about 25 years, and I always questioned, how can a child be P2 at age 6, and how can they still be P2 at the age 16? Because they've got 10 years lived experience that we're not accounting for, and we've not understood. And we frame it in, we could frame it in, say, Piaget terms, but then it still doesn't give us that deeper understanding of lived experience. So what I'm doing within my study is really thinking about the concept of engagement, because that is really a key phrase that, and Barry talked about how important it is, but it's about the lived experience of engagement, and then trying to understand that and describe that, much like what Luke was saying, is do we really understand what that is? Because it is so interpretive, it's so therapeutic, that we got an in-depth understanding of that, and where does that come from? And from my exploration of literature, there isn't anything particularly around PMLD and engagement. Can we have the next one, please? So I've just completed a pilot study where I've used photographs that we took as part of the assessment process within 2 settings that has worked, as Alan described. I've worked in 2 settings in the last 4 years, and I used those photographs. And I was particularly interested in photographs because I'm trying to capture the moment, and that moment will be a combination between the teachers or the teaching assistant's action in terms of pressing the button on the camera, the moment that they've chosen to take that photograph, and then what's happening, and not just the student, but the body and the objects and the ways in which I think Luke was talking about environment. Environment is incredibly important in terms of the process of learning. So all those factors and the way it's framed in the photograph is really important part of the analysis. So the 2 other aspects of my data collection, just very briefly, are anecdotes, and I've involved 10 teachers across the country, and they've written anecdotes for me over the last 3-4 months, and the next stage of that is to discuss their anecdotes with them. And then I've also written my own learning stories, I've called them, around my own teaching. So next slide, please. So one of the challenges I've had with this is I didn't understand this to start with, and then so I went through the ethical process at university, and then it's been difficult to some extent to gain participants in this process. So it does have ethical approval from Leeds Beckett University, and consent forms have very detailed information about what actually is involved. From this point of view, it's the gatekeeper that gives consent for very specific reasons. So no photographs will ever be shared. It won't be published. It is purely for analysis purposes. And absolutely, Merleau-Ponty is very much part of my, I'm just reading the comments that are coming up, very much part of my theoretical framework. So photographs are stored in an encrypted file. So the data collection must come from data that's been generated as part of the school's normal processes, i.e. those photographs that you take during assessment practice that you might upload, for example, to Evidence for Learning, which is why I approached Alan to see, you know, who does that. There are some people who I had a conversation with one head teacher who was very adamant that they don't use photographs and they don't want to use photographs because it's not, you know, teachers are able to write anecdotes and very good observations. And my argument with it is photographs actually do something very different, and it comes back to what's already been said, particularly around non-verbal people. And it provides you with information that you can't get if it's somebody's interpretation in writing. And that's the bit that I'm really interested in, is what, you know, positions of bodies, you know, choices that teachers have taken in terms of taking that photograph, or whether it's teacher or a teaching assistant. So that's really important. It is purely just a range of photographs. It doesn't have to be the same student. It can be a range of different students. But again, following on what Luke was talking about, I'm really interested in different places where you've taken that photograph, because I've all the ones that I have were very much classroom based, and I was really interested in outside provision, sensory rooms, the pool, etc., 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 because to see how learning process takes shape in different places is really important. And obviously we're in the time of COVID, and the reason why this came up was because my original plan was to do close observations of students, and that just became impossible during the pandemic. So I re-looked at my data collection, and so therefore the photographs taken don't have to be in recent times. The anecdotes that I asked teachers to write didn't have to be from recent times. So it doesn't have to be, you know, in the last 12 months, it could have been photographs that were taken 2 years ago. Next slide, please. So what I'm basically asking for is any schools where they think the head teacher will be interested in sharing those photographs with me. My student email is on the screen there. Alan does have my student email as well. It can't go through my work email address because of this is to do with my doctorate and so on. So if anybody's interested, please do let me know. I'm not looking for millions of photographs, but I'm just looking for that range. In my analysis, I may not use all of them, but I'd be really, really grateful if any head teacher or any principal, any CEO, whatever role you have at the senior part of your school, if they would be willing to share those photographs. It doesn't have to be loads. It could only be 2 or 3. If that's what you're happy with, that's absolutely fine. I'm not asking for loads, but I'd be really grateful if you could email me. That would be great. And if anybody is interested in my research, please do get in touch. I am currently writing an article for British Institute of Learning Disabilities, the British Journal of Learning Disabilities. So hopefully something will come out soon. But thank you very much for listening, and thank you also to the other speakers, because it was really helpful to frame it with what you said. So thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thank you, Nathan. It's a pleasure to give you that platform. As I said, if anybody, as Nathan said, if anybody didn't catch his email address, if you get in touch with me, I can put you in touch. We will be sharing the video and the presentations from today, but it might not be for another week with everything else that we've got going on at the moment. So we'll move now to the breakout rooms. Thank you again to our speakers for their presentations. So the focus now is on conversation. So I've got 7 rooms that I've been putting together while the speakers have been talking. So I'll press a button in a moment. You'll all vanish from the main room and go into your breakout rooms. We put together 4 questions that we thought could sort of serve as a structure for the conversations. I emailed them to you this morning. So if you haven't got that email to hand, you might want to write these down now. So the first question, and this has some relevance to our meeting next week. What we'd like each group to do is, through a discussion, is maybe share back as a group one innovation from one of the schools that promotes positive mental health in children and young people with profound and multiple learning difficulties. So that's our first question that we'd like you to discuss. Secondly is a more general point, which is how is evidence for learning helping you to meet the emerging educational agenda for children and young people with PMLD? And then the third and fourth questions are really about looking at this group and thinking, well, this wonderful group of, there's 53 people on here at the moment, how might a group focused around PMLD going forward help you? Because what we'll do if there's interest is hold another, we can make this a regular thing where we get together once a term. I'm quite happy to effectively hand over the chair of this to somebody else. So if there's any volunteers that are interested in forming a steering group or something to take this on, then please do. But that third question is really about what questions or topics or what aspects could a collaboration group around PMLD give to you? And so those might identify, the answers to that might identify some topics for coverage at the next meeting. And then the last point is, if there are any questions, while we've got 53 people on the call today, are there any questions that as a group people are just interested in throwing into the group for maybe a bit of discussion at the end? Obviously, beyond these 4 questions, if there's time and you want to chat about other things, then please feel free.
We were having a good chat. We haven't finished.
Hey, Jeanette, sorry about that.
I'll let you know.
I think that's most people back now. What I'll do, because it's obviously going to become 3 o'clock before we know it, and people will have to dive off for dismissal. So let's use this sort of first couple of minutes just to thank our speakers again for putting themselves forward to share what they're doing, and thank you also to Professor Barry Carpenter for his opening address, which set a wonderful scene. And I think, as Nathan said, and Luke, there was really good synergy between everything that everybody was saying. But thanks again to Luke, to Sarah, and to Nathan for sharing. Thank you all very, very much. And if anybody's interested in presenting at the next session, then please just get in touch. Hopefully we'll identify some topics for discussion. So let's move to regrouping and sort of getting some feedback. We asked those questions. I'll go round the rooms. Let me start with room 1. Carol, are you still on the call? I can see we're part of room number 1. Are you happy, or was somebody in your room scribing that's happy to share some of your findings?
So the first question, really, I'm feeling quite a privileged position because our head teacher is relatively new to our school. She's been here about 3 years now, and mental health and wellbeing is her driver for everything. So since she came to school, we have managed to achieve the National Wellbeing Award for school, which is, there's not many special schools that have got it. We're not definitely not down in Hampshire anyway. I think we're one of 2. And we have a full interventions team that work with all of our students, but also focus on our PMLD young people with a whole heap of different interventions, from music intervention, music therapy, Reiki, massage and positive touch, ELSA, lots of different things going on. So we are I think in a very privileged position that she puts such a high degree of importance on that. And we also have a lead member of our teaching staff who is a trained counsellor and able to offer counselling for our students as well as our staff, actually. So there is a really high emphasis in school on wellbeing and mental health, and I think we've seen that transition through all of our classes and all of our young people. And I was saying to the other people in my group, I've got 14 to 19-year-olds who are complex PMLD, and 3 of them have degenerative conditions that are getting towards the end of their lives now, and we have music therapy intervention for them, and their response in those sessions is so different from their responses in classical classroom activities, and I feel very privileged to be able to go in with them and support them through that. And again, the whole idea about, you know, our kids starting at P2 and ending at P2, but the emotional maturity of them in those sessions to be able to deal with what they're going through, but to use that therapy intervention to do that, just shows how much they've changed from the time when they were little and started school to the young adults that they are now. And that's been really, really great to see. And we have drama therapists from Roehampton and art therapists that are training from Roehampton as well coming into work. So I think we are in a very privileged position that Nikki, our head, is such a great advocate for that for us.
Thank you. Well, look, let's stick with that first question then and go around the room, so to speak, so we can kind of build some momentum around that topic. Thanks, Carol. In room 2, Nathan or Jeanette, or does somebody want to share maybe one innovation in one of the schools within your group that again is promoting that positive mental health?
I didn't get the person's name who spoke so enthusiastically. I don't know if she wants to share about her about the work around Sheridan Foster's hanging out program. Is she still here? I don't know if she wants to share or not. I'm quite happy to share if she wants me to.
Hi, I'm still here.
Oh, there.
Hey, Rhiannon.
I'll let you share, Rhiannon.
Hello.
Hello.
I was just talking about how Sheridan and Foster's Hanging Out project is obviously not new or innovative because it was in 2007. But I had returned to work after being ill, and I was very interested in it at the time. And so I've been trying to do work around that also whilst being outdoors. And the programme was based on the idea that as a worker in a care setting, Sheridan felt that many adults with learning difficulties might experience loneliness because people might come and interact with them for short periods or to support with various daily living tasks, but then go off to do something else and help somebody else. And so the idea is very simple, that you will just spend 10 minutes fully with your full focus of attention on that person and hang out with them. And so that's what we've been trying to do in some of our sessions outdoors on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Great stuff. Room 3, Sarah Riley. I don't know if you want to sort of take the chair on that one, or if there was somebody in your group that has an innovation that you think would be good to share with everybody.
No, they asked me to do it. I think it's a very basic thing really for at least 3 members of the group. It was that they had new head teachers and new leaders who have allowed them to move away from subject-specific teaching and be based around the needs of the students, and that obviously has helped the well-being of everybody because the students are more engaged in the learning, and the staff, I suppose, are, you know, feel better about their job roles because they can see that they're making a difference. So it was just that wide range in change to go from, you know, being schools that had subjects, and perhaps where the PMLD children were in mixed classes with other children, where, you know, where they were perhaps getting left behind in periods of stressful times for the other children. So that's what would make a difference for them.
Great stuff. Thank you, Sarah. Room number 4, I don't know, Heather Martin. Heather, do you want to sort of take the baton for that one?
Yeah, that's fine. So we had a great discussion. We talked about zones of regulation, emotion coaching, the significance of intensive interaction. And there was one school that actually said, if all on their planning and things, if there's a significant interaction, everything else stops. And that's really building those relationships and those trusts with the adults. Then we went on to a really interesting conversation actually about how much we do and how much it is adult-led in work with PMLD pupils, and actually being brave and having the courage to actually step back a little bit. And we were talking about using pause, giving time, and actually have been courageous and actually just letting them be together. And it's not just for a couple of minutes, it's over a longer period of time. So there's some really good examples of that. So it's just that courage, isn't it? And actually, if someone walked into your room and you just step back and doing nothing, what would it look like to others? But actually, those relationships and that interaction of that independence would grow. And we've talked about like a flexible timetable and actually doing things perhaps that is pushing the boat out a little bit. And we see children that react in different ways when we don't even expect it. When we talked about a lot of wide range of activities really that would encourage that.
Great stuff. Thanks, Heather. That's brilliant. Room number 5. I don't know, Nicola or Jennifer, do you want to?
I think I was in number 5.
Or Lucy, yeah, Lucy,
Hi,
yeah, please do. Hiya.
Hi. A lot of what other people have said before. Carol said that they have positive behaviour strategies, so they'll have a format of what a good day looks like for their pupils. They use the MOVE programme. Some schools have the requirement for at least one IEP for wellbeing. My school is currently training a great deal of staff to be mental health champions. We have ELSAs, stress boxes and worry boxes. Someone else said, I can't remember your name, sorry, said that half-termly afternoons based on well-being go ahead. And we all have the things like music therapy, accessible art, dance, etc., intensive interaction. My school actually works on the informal equals curriculum, so it's basically life skills and knowing yourself and your body rather than the traditional curriculum points. But yeah, it was pretty much what everyone else said as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you. No, thanks very much. Room 6, Kate, Kaylee, are you still on? Do you mind taking the baton for that? Or Serena, or anybody who was in room number 6 if they want to?
Hi, I was in room
unmute. Hey, Eleanor, yeah, please do, yeah.
Thanks.
Over to you.
Lucy, I'm at the same school as Lucy, so Lucy's helped me out a bit on what my school are doing. Thanks, Lucy. So in my group there was a lady called Helen, so Helen Stanley. She spoke about how her school had created like a discovery day. So that was really about raising the status of the PMLD users within the school. And it focused a lot around the engagement of pupils, and it was to kind of showcase an example of like best practice. So they came up with a theme of nature, and Helen sort of arranged different packs, I think, if I understood it correctly, of different textures and sensory bits. So she had like oats, shaving foam, like crackly cereal, different like sensory things, and they had a kind of a theme of Andy Goldsworthy's work. So it was a bit of a like exhibition, I think, that they ended up having. And they had kind of cargo nets and different like installations happening all over the school. And it was about exploration and just something a bit different, and focusing again on that positive engagement and fun and active learning and kind of coming together and making something together. Hope I've understood that rightly, Helen. And so that was fab to hear about. And then Steve, also in our group, he talked a bit about rebound therapy. We've all tried to kind of keep the usual things going, like rebound, hydrotherapy, music therapy, etc. But Steve had actually gone a step further, and he had got a trampoline in his classroom, so he'd managed to get funding for a 3/4 of the size one, so that even if his pupils couldn't access the usual rebound therapy, they could do that within class. So I thought that was really fab. Yeah, I think that's it.
That's great. Yeah, no, look, thank you. No, fabulous. Luke, you were in room 7, and I guess as a speaker, if you don't mind, that would be great.
And it's telling that we spent most of our time talking about the first one and did very little on any of the others. Clearly, mental health was positive mental health was very important. Emma Stubbings spoke a little bit about the development of the wellbeing curriculum at her school, and the notion of a kind of bespoke sense-assembly or sensory assembly, and that being incredible, you know, a scripted, structured kind of assembly, but specific for the needs of PMLD. And that came up again, a daily assembly. Sarah Cleaver was talking about, you know, certain colours and certain scents and certain themes for an assembly to give, you know, to place the learner. And we also talked about the NHS Smile programme, how helpful that's been in our work. Nicola Cryer talked about using outside space, promoting the use of outside space, developing outside space. But one thing that really struck me about all the conversations we had about it is that we ended up not just talking about the well-being of the learners, we're also talking about, you know, it's intrinsically linked to the well-being of the staff. That's a massive component in the well-being programme of any school, not just for the learners, but for your staff. Yeah, that's it really. Oh, just told, Lindsay Barker said a classic, which is simple but so effective: making time for conversations, for learners to talk to one another in whatever that sensory conversation looks like. You know, just an opportunity for talk, and staff to step back and allow those conversations. That's it.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you, and thanks for mentioning the staff piece, because next week we're going to have Dr. Tina Ray is going to cover staff wellbeing as part of the wellbeing agenda on Tuesday. So that should be a fantastic session as well, just taking that whole concept further. Let's go back to the second question then, and maybe Carol, if we go back to room one again, from anybody within the room, is there any ideas that you think are worth sharing around how EfL is helping folks to meet the emerging educational agenda for children and young people with PMLD?
We had the discussion really around the engagement model for that, and how people were kind of starting to implement that a bit more into their school systems, and where they've got and how they're using it within EfL. So I think we're all at the early stages, but at slightly different levels of what we were doing with regards to who was using it, how the evidence was being collated for that. So that kind of took our focus really, the engagement model within our group.
Okie dokie. And was that then looking at how, if we make it about EfL, like using the indicators and how to pull all that information together? And
yeah, I mean, we were talking a lot about how it informs our practice as much as showing, you know, sort of progress or anything for individual students. But because I find the 2 boxes where I actually have to analyse why they were at that level of engagement, the most useful parts of that on EfL, because then I sit there and I have a look and think, what is it that I was doing? What was it special about that activity that day? How that young person was, that will help me to develop my practice so that they can be as engaged as they can be, as often as they can be. And I think that part of it for me is really useful. And we are using it across the school, whether the kids are at the really earliest levels or not. So some of our other learners who are at higher levels, but possibly not making the progress or don't seem as engaged and enthralled by certain activities or their schooling. So we're using it for everybody in some degree or another, but a lot more for our PMLD students.
Gotcha. No, that's great. Thank you. And then just in case anybody wants any assistance with figuring out how to use EfL to support your use of the engagement model, just get in touch with Blake or myself and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction on that. So group number 2, Nathan, do you want to pick up that one?
Yeah, there was quite a few people in our group who weren't yet using it or at the beginning stage of using it. So I was talking about we've used it for staff professional development, for example. So our intensive interaction tutors used it to record staff doing their training in terms of intensive interaction, and then looking back and sharing their practice and talking about developing their own practice, particularly when they're new to working in PMLD pathway. So I think that's quite an interesting way of using it that's different. But obviously all the other, we talk more about the engagement in the third question. So
no, that sounds good. No, it's interesting. I mean, that's one of the things that I find when I'm speaking to schools around the country is lots of schools seem to be wrestling with this idea of what evidence is. Why do we collect evidence? What do we want to be able to use our evidence for? And then that leads to a whole set of questions about when we collect evidence, what that evidence includes. And it's like you said, it ends up being far more than just evidence to support assessment at a point in time. It can actually be a resource in its own right, can't it? Whether it's supporting CPD or transitions as a child goes from one practitioner to another, maybe it's supporting out to the family as well. Now that's great. Sarah Riley, obviously you showed some fabulous stuff around how you're using it at West Silk. Was there anything else that came out of your group?
People felt that it helped to build a truer picture of the child, and that actually if you use video and you're uploading your video clips, it helped teachers to see things that they perhaps missed that in the moment when it was being recorded and they were doing the teaching, and it helped them to improve their practice. And Stuart said that they'd parents during lockdown, parents had uploaded lots of evidence themselves, and the staff had been able to feed back to the parents, and that had been really useful.
No, that's great. It was interesting. I had a conversation with a head teacher over half term who was saying that he had a member of staff who was quite resistant to the using EfL, the technology, just as a bit of, just not so into it. And what this head teacher said was that this teacher had a eureka moment when they were watching a video of a child who was over here, and they noticed in the background of that video the way one of the other children who wasn't supposed to even be in the video was reacting, and that then very quickly, that was the eureka moment, saying, "Great, that's why we need this," because nobody caught that in the moment. So it was really interesting that you brought that point up.
And somebody else said they were using it to help show their governors why the teaching and learning for PMLD children needed to be different.
That's interesting too. No, fabulous, thank you. Room 4, the folks in room 4 is dwindling. So I don't know if Donna, Ellie or Jackie want to share any thoughts from the room 4 discussion. If you don't, that's fine, and we can move on to room 5. But if you'd want to unmute yourself and speak, feel free to. No, I'll move on. This is that time in proceedings where the room dwindles, and we'll work with whoever's left. Thanks for sticking around. So room 5, Nicola, Lucy again, if you want to speak, or Kate.
Yeah, sorry, I took the notes. So some of our group are only just trialing EfL, so they haven't actively used it yet. Okay. My school has used it since September, and we're going live to parents this September. Comments that were made were that it's very good for MAP assessment, to actually build up the assessment grids and so on to drop into EHCPs and so on. Personally, I think the engagement model is really good. I'd like to know more about that because our school doesn't use that at the moment, as far as I'm aware. Eleanor, is that right? Are you aware of the engagement model?
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but I think that September it's kind of going to start coming in a bit more. We're not
brilliant. Yeah, so that's something that I'd really be pushing, because I actually assisted in helping set up the EfL and doing training and so on. In fact, I have a very simple booklet on how to use EfL if anyone wants it, especially for TAs and so on in September. It's a really good recording tool of progress, and the video function's really good with some of the other comments. Another person said that they're not overly keen on taking photographs and things like that, because sometimes the photograph doesn't really tell the story. So that's when we discussed the fact that you can have comments. You can just put a comment. You don't need a video. You don't need a photograph. You can just put a comment, because that's you using your professional judgment to assess that child. Personally, I think it's great. That's it.
I agree. There we go. Joking.
Oh, and just one last thing. We have literally this week just sent out our first reports by using the learning journey function, and it saved me so much work.
Oh, fabulous. Great. And you can now make documents on the web console, by the way, everybody. That went live this 2 weeks ago, I think, just after half term. So you don't have to do them on your iPad and then send them up. You can do them straight into the console. No, great. Thanks, Lucy. So room 6, I don't know, Eleanor, if you want to speak on that one, or Helen or Kaylee or Rhiannon, anybody feel free to pick up.
Okay. I'll just say a little bit sort of on the back of what Lucy said. So we've just sent our end of year reports out and the learning journey, and I had some feedback from a parent, and she said it's really useful because throughout her child's education, people have sort of different professionals have interpreted his behaviour in quite a different way, and I think the language that they've used is like quite emotive, and it's about their interpretation of what that child is doing, whereas now she's able to sort of see video footage of what he's doing, and she can then interpret that for herself, and it gives a kind of a true picture for her in her eyes. And what else did we say? So people in my group commented on the user-friendly interface of EfL in general, and you know, it's all really clear. It's available to see on the iPad and also on the computer, and it's great that we can involve parents in the child's learning journeys. And I've got lots of notes. My group sort of said the next steps that they would like to see, or the next thing they'd like to get from this group, is they'd like to know how people are implementing the engagement model on EfL. So similarly, a few of us aren't actually using the engagement model yet. People are tending to use EfL for the map, the continuum, and also the EHCP outcomes. An engagement model is kind of the next level.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for those points. Go on,
actually, Alan, could I say on that, Alan, I wonder if therefore in the autumn term we ought to think about one of these meetings for the PMLD group specifically on the engagement model, because I think Lucy was saying earlier, you know, wasn't overly familiar with it yet. Can we remind ourselves that as of September, the engagement model is statutory summative assessment. There is a legal requirement. If Ofsted come in after September, they will want to see your plans for collecting evidence against the statutory summative assessment. And it certainly includes your group of learners. I mean, the term I tend to use most is, can we remind ourselves, the Rochford Review talked about using the engagement model for students not engaged in subject-specific learning. Well, you know, that now, post-pandemic, or coming to the end of a pandemic, we hope, or after children have experienced so many lockdowns, that's a huge group compared to what was originally conceived, which was it replaced P1 to 4, which is a fairly naive bolt holding anyway. It is going to embrace a much wider group of learners, and I think those of you working in this sector who can get your competencies together very quickly will be rich colleagues in terms of skills for others throughout the school who are dealing with children not engaged in subject-specific learning post-pandemic. Thank you.
No, thanks, Barry. Well, look, I'm really happy to do that. What I would ask is for willing volunteers who are happy to share what they're doing around both using the engagement model, but also then how they're using evidence for learning to support that. I mean, I'm aware of a few schools, but if anybody on the group wants to share, that would be awesome. Luke, you mentioned that you got very deep with the first session. Do you have anything do we want to move on to that next session? I don't know if you've got anything about EfL, but if you want to jump into that third question, which was about how might the working group support people going forward, feel free to pick up both of those.
Yeah, well, we had for 3 and 4, we really, I mean, Emma Stubbings, if she's still on the call, she was talking about the real practical aspects of creating reports in the app and doing an engagement profile for a learner. So there's some real practical training aspects that we discussed. And that was it, really. Sorry, we did well on well-being.
No, that's fine. You certainly did. That's great. Thank you. Well, look, let's work back up then. So, Carol, do you want on room 1? If you're still on, Carol Mason, I can't see you. Yep, you are. Hey, yeah. On that third and fourth question, in terms of how the group might support everybody going forward, are there any topics or areas of interest, or even just activities that we might do as a group?
I mean, I've been reading the chat, and there seems to be a lot of people interested in discussing different interventions that people are using, and it's kind of that sharing good practice again, really, because we've always been quite isolated as PMLD practitioners, because we are maybe the only one in your school, or you may geographically not have other schools around you, and where we used to get together physically on courses and stuff, that's when we used to discuss all of those things and be able to do that sharing, and obviously post-pandemic we're not doing that. So I think that would be a really good opportunity.
Sharing.
I run a group in Hampshire anyway, for our PMLD practitioners in the Hampshire schools, and that's the kind of things we do in that group, and then get guest speakers in to try and give us all a bit of CPD as well.
No, that sounds good. I mean, that's what I'm hoping these social networking tools will do. If anyone uses LinkedIn, or people are a member of Facebook groups, what we're essentially doing is like an EfL version of Facebook, but you're not going to be on Facebook. You'll be able to use your login that you use for the web console to opt into a safe, secure, closed community where you literally will be able to post questions. We'll have a PMLD group on there where people can post, people can moderate it, and you'll be able to share. So the idea is hopefully it'll be somewhere where people can post resources, like Lucy's booklet, for example, practical resources, or even papers that you've read, research that you've read that you think is particularly worthy of sharing, but also where you can maybe just ask questions and people can pick them up. The way it'll work is you'll be able to we'll have a bunch of tags in the social network. So it might be like therapies, PMLD. And then if you subscribe to a tag, you'll get an alert anytime somebody within your tags makes a post. So it's a way of just keeping abreast of what the community are talking about. So we're hoping that'll be live sometime in the autumn. But no, thanks for that. Nathan, are you still around, or can't see your face? We're down to the last 30 people.
I think he had to go and do some training. I think he's left.
No, that's fine. Fiona, Sadie, Rhiannon, Gillian, what I'll do is I'll open it up to anybody. So if anybody wants to unmute and raise any points on that topic of how we as a group might be able to support each other going forward, please feel free to speak.
Alan, I have to go. Our group didn't get round to it, but if you could possibly email me where I could send the booklet to be shared with the members who want it.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, actually, a cheeky favour. If you're happy to share it, if you email it to me, then I'll include it with the presentations when I share them to everyone afterwards.
That's fine. I just need to anonymise it because it was for our school. So I just need to go through and take all the names out and check with management that they're happy for me to do it, but I'm sure they will be.
No, look, it's very kind of you to do that, so thank you.
So if I just email you on the email that you sent us the link and stuff?
Yeah, that's my standard email, so yeah.
Okay, lovely. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, bye.
Well, look, if nobody else has any further comments, I'll wait 5 seconds just in case anybody does. Feel free to.
I think I was just interested to sort of see how other schools are using EfL with the engagement profile, because we've sort of had our own way of doing engagement profile on paper for a long time. We're moving to be a lot more EfL based next year, and I haven't got my head around how that looks and how that does kind of what we want it to do. So seeing how other people are connecting those two systems, I think for our PMLD learners would be really, really interesting.
Right. Well, we'll definitely do an event in the autumn, even aside from a general. I mean, I'm quite happy to facilitate a general get together like this, and then an event focused specifically on engagement. Again, it's if there's interest. So if people want that, then just, as I say, if you can volunteer, if you're interested in speaking at the next event, we'll get some dates in the diary in the autumn term. Hopefully, we'll even be able to do face-to-face meetings in the new academic year, which would be even better. So we can maybe do something where we're all in a room together and get round tables. Well, look, and in the meantime, Caroline, if you want to reach out to Blake, we'll be really happy to steer you at some videos and some support that can help you figure out how to use the indicators, because I think they'll be a really big help for you. Well, look, let's wrap things up then. That's 3:15. Thank you to everybody again, our speakers, but also to everybody that's participated. The power of these events is in everybody participating and joining in, whether it's presenting or being part of a group or writing something in the chat. So thank you all very, very much. Just a quick plug, we've got an early years event on Friday. So if you did want to go to that, or if you had somebody in your school that's interested in coming to that, that's 1 till 3 p.m. this Friday. We've already got about 60, 70 people signed up for that. We've got 2 schools are presenting alternative models of what they're doing post-September. Anyone in early years will know there's a new statutory framework out for early years. We've got 2 schools presenting 2 different approaches, one based on birth to 5 matters, one based on development matters. There'll be breakout rooms as well, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for discussion. And then we've got our big end of year event, which is next Tuesday, which again, this is free. It's not every day you get a chance to hear people like Professor Barry Carpenter, Dr. Tina Ray and Sharon Gray and some fabulous school practitioners as well as Laura Purser talk for nothing. So I really recommend you show up. That's going to be fantastic and such an important topic, both as we finish what's probably been one of the hardest years of our lives, let alone our working lives. And going into next year, there's obviously some important educational developments that very much have mental health at their heart. And Tuesday's meeting will be a fantastic primer to help initiate some of your thinking and planning around those things. Other than that, thanks again for today. And if you need anything between now and summer, do let us know. But other than that, I will leave you all to the rest of your Wednesday afternoon. Thank you very much for being part of today. Goodbye.
Bye.